أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
السلام عليكم.
الله أكبر، الله أكبر. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. نحمده ونستعينه ونستنصره ونسترضيه فإنه حق من هدى الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على الحبيب المصطفى محمد النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين خاتم الأنبياء والرسل أجمعين، وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين، وعلى أصحابه المختارين، وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم إنا نبتهل إليك في هذا الشهر المبارك، وندعوك فنقول: اللهم اصلح لنا ديننا الذي هو عصمة أمرنا، واصلح لنا دنيانا التي فيها معاشنا، واصلح لنا آخرتنا التي فيها معادنا. اللهم يا رب، اللهم اجعل الحياة زيادة لنا في كل خير، واجعل الموت راحة لنا من كل شر. لا إله إلا أنت. As we approach the last 10 days of Ramadan, you cannot but be overwhelmed by the events at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the heart of Jerusalem. If you have a pulse as a Muslim, you would have seen and been deeply affected by the image of Israeli soldiers wailing and beating Palestinian worshippers. So many issues raised, so many things that deserve pondering and deep reflection. One off the bat, although there are plenty of images that show Israeli soldiers beating, grabbing, dragging Palestinian women, and in the pictures you can clearly see that they're women. And in some cases, you can clearly see that they are not young women. One thing that struck me immediately, and you can verify it for yourself, although the images clearly show Israeli soldiers assaulting women, in the written descriptions, you will invariably find the description of what happened is Israeli soldiers assaulted men as women stood by and screamed, women and children, or as many reports put it, as women and children could be heard in the background screaming. There is even one place that posted the picture of Israeli soldiers clearly assaulting a muhajjaba. It is clear in the picture that it's a woman and it's a muhajjaba. But in the caption under the picture, this otherwise normal news outlet said, Israeli soldiers assaulting a Palestinian man. Yes, a lot of things to pause and to reflect upon and to talk about. But one of them is the way that even Muslim consciousness is conditioned to ignore what it can even see with its own eyes. Imagine if this was a picture, or if any of these pictures that were published were of Muslim men beating a Jewish woman or dragging a Jewish woman. It would be clearly described as an assault. But the word assault is rarely used. Leave alone women. These two words together, assault women. I remember that when Ramadan started, although I articulated it, but I am sure that Muslims all over the world were just waiting to hear of an Israeli assault against Muslims in Al-Aqsa, or an Israeli assault against Palestinians in Gaza. After all, Muslims have such a short memory span, but it wasn't that long ago when during the month of Ramadan, Israel sprayed Muslim worshippers with sewage water and defaced the land of Al-Aqsa Mosque with sewage water. Images of Israelis assaulting the Aqsa Mosque have become so regular, so common, that they hardly elicit a Muslim response at all. But all of us saw this Ramadan the way that Israeli soldiers are surreptitiously filmed, because if Israel could have prevented the leak of this film, it most certainly would have done. Beating on Palestinians as if they are hardly human at all, and in fact interrupting prayers without any regard to the sanctity of the month or of the space. Again, because Muslims have such a short memory span, and because they are conditioned falsely, their consciousness is engineered and conditioned in ways that are not just superficial, but conditioned against self-interest, so that Muslims cannot see what is even fact staring them in the face. It was not that long ago when stories leaked of then Prime Minister Rabin giving strict orders that the way Palestinians should be dealt with is by breaking bones. It wasn't that long ago when it was uncovered that Israeli soldiers were explicitly given orders not just to beat Palestinians, but to actually induce fractures purposely. Well, Ben Gvir, shortly after the assault by Israeli forces against Muslim worshippers, a conversation was leaked where Ben Gvir is justifying planned violence against Muslims in Al-Aqsa, and in a very typically racist way, but a racist way that has become so common, so regular, so persistent, that even Arabs and Muslims themselves no longer recognize it as what it is: racism. Ben Gvir talks about in this leaked conversation. I had the article here, but anyway, he is talking about the planned storming of the Aqsa Mosque. And he is saying about how we Israelis must storm the Aqsa Mosque, Jews must ascend to the Temple Mount, meaning Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Temple Mount is not just for Arabs, but in a typically racist way. He says, well, it is in the nature of these Muslims to kill one another, which is a classic racist Israeli justification for violence against Palestinians. And the justification is, it doesn't matter if we do it, because if we don't, they'll do it to one another anyway. Anyone that has dealt with the human rights violations of the Israeli state is all too accustomed to this justification and this logic and this blatantly racist argument. Israel doesn't allow for i'tikaf in the Aqsa Mosque except for the last 10 days of Ramadan. And it's regularly, this Ramadan has forced Palestinians to evacuate the premises of Al-Aqsa Mosque every day at 7 a.m. to open the gates for Jewish Israeli settlers to storm the Aqsa Mosque and to lay claim to the Aqsa Mosque. But in a pattern of escalating violence, not only has Israel made clear that i'tikaf is not permitted, and not only has it attempted to clear the premises at 7 in the morning, but what instigated the assaults against Palestinians was even before Palestinians were able to finish Taraweeh prayers, Israeli forces interrupted Taraweeh prayers and wanted Palestinians to clear out. And wanted to clear out to create facts on the ground, as Israel has done, because we Muslims have such a short memory and such a false memory. We forget all too quickly that this has been an ideological and methodical process. Israel colonizes Palestine by changing the facts on the ground. They might or might not acknowledge the law, i.e. international law, but they continue changing the facts on the ground until the claim of law sounds empty and absurd. This is the way that Israel has changed the facts on the ground since 1948, until the partition plan sounded ridiculous. This is the way that Israel has changed facts on the ground in the Golan and what they call Judea and Samaria, which, although persistently claiming that they play by the rules of international law and indulging in the absurdity of the negotiations with Palestinians and pretending to give leeway to Palestinian statehood, they continue to change the facts on the ground. We forget so easily that it wasn't that long ago when we have a living example in the Ibrahimi Mosque. The Ibrahimi Mosque has been a Muslim mosque forever. But Israel has changed the facts on the ground. And now Jewish fanatics have equal rights with Muslims to the Ibrahimi Mosque, although the history of the Ibrahimi Mosque is interlinked truly only with Islam. Before Islam, it was a neglected site. That not even Christianity or Judaism before Islam gave any attention to. But of course, most Muslims don't know, and if they know, they've forgotten, and if they haven't forgotten, they don't truly care. So when Netanyahu's fanatic government and Ben-Gvir's fanatic government announces that this Ramadan it will support the right of religious fanatics, Jewish religious fanatics, to storm Al-Aqsa and to slaughter animals on the mount, and they talk about equal rights in the Mount Temple, i.e. the Aqsa Mosque, although rabbinic law for centuries has prohibited Jews from worshipping anywhere in the quarters of Al-Aqsa Mosque, because rabbinic literature, long before the Zionist movement was ever born, declared the Aqsa Mosque off bounds or illegitimate territory for the performance of ritual and worship. That under rabbinic law, if you perform your prayer on the mount, as opposed to the Wailing Wall, your prayers are not accepted. Because for centuries, before Zionism, the idea that the two destroyed temples lay somewhere under the Aqsa Mosque was purely speculative. And Israel has been digging under the Aqsa Mosque now forever to find one shred of proof that in fact this was the site of the two temples, and have come up with absolutely nothing. false consciousness, and artificiality of memory and realization. Right before, a few days before, Israel assaulted worshippers at the Aqsa Mosque, arresting some 500 people. There was an event. Because Muslim life is so cheap, no one noticed, no one cared, no one condemned, no one said anything. Muhammad al-Usaybi, a young, gifted Palestinian doctor. The thing about Muhammad al-Usaybi is he is ethnically Palestinian, meaning he's an Arab. But he was indeed a citizen of the State of Israel. And because he is a citizen of the State of Israel, unlike other Palestinians who are not citizens of the State of Israel, Muhammad al-Usaybi had access to the Aqsa Mosque despite his young age, and did not have to go through the vetting and screening and tortuous inspections and humiliations that Palestinians normally have to go through to access Al-Aqsa Mosque. Muhammad al-Usaybi is an Israeli citizen which regularly pray at the Aqsa Mosque in Ramadan. However, at Bab al-Silsila, which translates to the chain gate, he saw Israeli soldiers harassing, molesting, assaulting, mistreating a Palestinian woman. And he thought that as an Israeli citizen, he can intervene to bring an end to the way this Palestinian woman was being treated. What he got for his troubles is that he was shot 10 times by Israeli soldiers and killed. And because Muslim life is so cheap, no one cared. Imagine if this was other than an Arab and other than a Muslim. Imagine all the expert waxing about militancy in the Jewish tradition, all the blabbering on of academics and scholars about trends and orientations and potential and not potentiality, but trends and orientations in Jewish thinking and the problem with Jewish thought and where does extremism come, the roots of extremism and racism and bigot and so on and on and on. But because he's a Palestinian doctor, no one cared. Israel gave its typical justification, and explanation. Oh, we shot him because once we tried to arrest him, he tried to go for one of the guards' guns. I have been hearing this explanation for the extrajudicial killing of Palestinians since I was 6 years old, as long as I can remember. Apparently, according to Israel, the Palestinian mind, the Muslim mind, the Arab mind, yes, they can study and go to medical school and become doctors, but they can't help themselves. The minute you try to arrest them lawfully, they quite irrationally try to grab a soldier's gun off his belt. Changing facts on the ground, a long history of documented abuses and suffering. Again, other than Muhammad al-Asaibi, days before Israel's assault on the Aqsa Mosque, Israel extrajudicially executed 2 Palestinians in the West Bank. No one cares. No one remembers. Since the beginning of 2023, Israel has extrajudicially executed 93 or 94 Palestinians. No one remembers. No one cares. Look at the extent of how false consciousness is created. In an important article by, I believe his name is David Cook, although I can't quite read the first name, but he's a journalist who's written 3 books about Palestinians, and unless I'm misremembering, I think his first name is David. No, it's Jonathan Cook. It's Jonathan Cook. It's not David Cook. Jonathan Cook. Jonathan Cook writes about how the BBC coverage is enabling Israeli violence. And in his article, he notes what Desmond Tutu said about the South African apartheid a long time ago. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Desmond Tutu also has a rather well-known statement about the elephant stepping on a little mouse's tail. If you try to remain neutral, think of what the mouse or what would think of you, with an elephant stepping on his tail. If you try to remain neutral in situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. And Jonathan Cook goes on to show how the BBC's coverage is precisely choosing the side of the oppressor under the guise of fair reporting and objectivity. So for instance, the BBC introduced what happened as clashes erupt at contested holy site. Clashes erupt. The violence was by a state that has all the powers of a state against unarmed civilian worshippers. The violence was against men, women, and children who was doing nothing but worship, only to be assaulted and beaten. And the way that the BBC reports it is clashes erupt, as if you have two equal forces that happen to go at it. At a contested holy site, suddenly international law doesn't matter to the BBC. The fact that Jerusalem is occupied territory, whichever way you slice it or dice it, is irrelevant to the BBC. The fact that it is only a small religious fanatic minority that has repeatedly said that their plan is to destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque and rebuild the temple, suddenly has become a contested holy site. The fact that the Aqsa Mosque is not supposed to be under Israeli sovereignty, and the entire edifice of international law that we keep blabbing on about is supposed to place the administration of the Aqsa Mosque and the Mount Temple under Palestinian and Jordanian authority. The fact that Israel has broken all the agreements with both the Jordanian and Palestinian authorities, violated these agreements in letter and spirit repeatedly, and usurped control of the Aqsa Mosque, all of that doesn't matter to the BBC as it reports that clashes erupt in a contested holy site. The formation of consciousness. How did we get here? How did we get to the point that the Aqsa Mosque can be repeatedly violated, that Islamic sites can be repeatedly assaulted? How did we get to the point where we tolerate and go on without further ado when historical sites in India are destroyed and Muslim mosques, centuries old, with a glorious history, are razed to the ground because this was supposed to be the birthplace of the god Ram? Again, without any historical evidence that the god Ram was born at the location of the Babri Mosque that was destroyed by Hindu extremists. The manipulation of Muslim consciousness is it's the manipulation of a subordinated people. One of the regular dynamics of subordination is that subordinator constructs the consciousness of the subordinated. Where is the root of the problem? And I submit to you, the root of the problem is when Muslims were brainwashed by their subordinators as a subordinated people to think about their causes and goals in a segmented and compartmentalized way. The colonial subordinator never accepted Islam as a universal religion. For the subordinator, i.e. the colonizer, Islam was always a racialized religion. Islam was always the religion of the Arab, the religion of the Saracen, the religion of the Turk, the religion of the Moors. Islam was never, like Christianity, considered a universal faith. The colonizer, the subordinator, looked at Islam like it looked at Judaism. Judaism was the religion of the Israelites, and Islam was the religion of the people of the desert. Wherever the colonizer went, they could not and did not come to terms with Islam in India, Islam in the Philippines, Islam in Indonesia, Islam in Vietnam, Islam in Burma, Islam in the Bahamas, Islam in South America. And this is why, despite the sociological reality, I want to underscore this because it is absurdly obvious, but I can't tell you how many academics don't see this. Bernard Lewis in the 90s started talking about, can Muslims possibly coexist with non-Muslims as minorities? Can Muslims possibly live under the sovereignty of non-Muslims? And what Bernard Lewis intended and meant when he raised this question is to cast doubt on the ability of Muslims in the West to be loyal and faithful citizens of their respective countries in the West. Although the fact that Islam for hundreds of years existed as a minority religion in hundreds of locations was an undeniable sociological reality. But false consciousness, all Muslim scholars and non-Muslim scholars rushed to discuss or to prove that yes, Sharia can accommodate Muslims living in non-Muslim sovereignty, although the sociological reality it's the same thing as when the colonizer goes to Australia or goes to New Zealand or goes to North America And clearly the land is inhabited by people. And yet the colonizer says, I discovered the land. And the year of the discovery is X. The reality of the subordinator is that the subordinated are a disappeared and an invisible people. So the colonizer saw Mecca and Medina as an exclusive Bedouin concern of Al Saud. And the Quds, Jerusalem, it's really simply the concern of Palestinian people. The real disaster is when Muslim consciousness altered to buy the garbage, so that Al-Quds no longer became a Turkish concern, no longer became a Persian concern, no longer became an Indonesian concern, no longer became a Malaysian concern. The only people that Israel and the West had to deal with and worry about are the natives of Al-Quds, which, like all indigenous native populations, could be erased by the colonizer without any worry or serious concern. The theology of the colonizer is superimposed upon the colonized. Listen, just as these events unfolded, I was reading a truly shocking report The report is called the RSS Network in Canada. The report tracks the RSS, I can't pronounce the Rashtriya Simon Sevak Sangh. That's what RSS stands for. Anyway, this is a network of Hindu non-profit organizations that exists in no less than 25 countries, including Canada and the United States. And its primary function is A, to malign Islam and Muslims, B, to raise millions of dollars to support the Hindutva, the fascist Hindu nationalist ideology that very openly calls for the extermination of Muslims in India. What is striking is how wherever the RSS exists in all the advanced countries of the world, has a remarkable unity of purpose and goal, and raises millions and millions of dollars that it sends to India in support of Modi's government, and funds a great deal of the atrocities against Muslims in India, including something like the destruction of the Barbie Mosque. And yet, no one dares to even see the obvious link between the raising of funds and the commission of terror in the case of Hindus. The real thing that you pause at is that how free Hindus are to think about unity of cause and unity of purpose and unity of identity. Whether Hindus are in Canada or in Brazil, their sense of, for this movement, I'm not talking about all Hindus in the world, I'm talking about this particular orientation in Hinduism, which is militant and grossly nationalistic. And the amount of resources that they are able to raise for their cause. And you pause and you think, nothing like this exists in the world of Islam. The Muslim mind is so colonized that we've completely bought into the idea that what happens in Mecca is a Saudi concern and what happens in Al-Aqsa is a Palestinian concern. To the extent that Muslim countries like Indonesia, when it sees Arab countries take the backseat on issues relating to Jerusalem, so do they. That obvious sense that Al-Aqsa is a Muslim cause, not an Arab cause, not a Palestinian cause. That if you mess with Al-Aqsa, then you have to mess with the entire Muslim world. That the consequences could be truly grave because the Muslims around the world will not let it go is completely absent in the Muslim colonized mind. So just before the khutbah started, I learned that there was an attempt to get the Security Council to examine, to look into, to investigate, to issue a resolution about what happened. There was even a suggestion by countries that are friendly to Israel. Okay, fine, let's condemn what the violence that Israel perpetuated at the Aqsa Mosque, but at the same time, let's condemn the firing of rockets from Gaza at Israel and from Lebanon at Israel. And of course, we will not condemn the disproportionate response by Israel. That never happens. But that motion was quashed by the US and Israel. The US and Israel would not allow, even if the resolution would condemn the violence or the firing of rockets from Gaza and Lebanon against Israel. Why? Because they don't want the Mount Temple to be a matter of international concern, even to be a matter of Muslim concern. They want it to be simply a matter between them and Palestinians, because they know they're the occupier. They're the elephant stepping on the mouse's tail. They know that Israeli technology, tanks and airplanes and missiles and nuclear weapons are disproportionate in strength to a highly dependent Palestinian economy, to an anemic Palestinian production. Half the people in Gaza don't have a source of income. It is an unequal fight between natives and colonizers. And colonizers know the end of the story. You do it slow, but you do it steadily, but you erase and eradicate the natives bit by bit by bit. In the same way that the sociology of Native Americans in America is horrible. Unemployment rates, drug addiction, alcoholism, health services in the doldrums, the regular commission of sexual violence against Native Americans in America that goes uninvestigated, the number of Native Americans that are abducted and forced into human trafficking and sex trafficking, astounding. Most Americans don't know anything about it. It didn't happen overnight, but it happened steadily and methodically. And as long as the fate of Native Americans remained solely an American issue and an American concern, that's why when every time any black movement tried to raise the issue of reparations for slavery, or tried to raise the issue of the racial mistreatment of blacks in the US, including a very famous incident in which a black intellectual prepared a report, famous report called "We Charge Genocide," documenting that about 30,000 blacks are killed every year in the United States, either from lynching or from police violence or from improper imprisonments, and called it as it is, a genocide. And when these attempts to raise anything that has to do with the fate of blacks, or Native Americans for that matter, in the UN, the United States had flipped out every single time and completely prevented and obstructed the discussion of anything relating to race or Native Americans in the UN. Not because the UN is an effective forum, but because of consciousness. The United States cannot afford for blacks to see the obvious links between their plight and the plight of colonized people around the world. The United States cannot afford to have blacks see the links between their plight and the plight of Africa, and the political devastation and economic devastation in Africa. 1 million children under 5 in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger alone face starvation in Africa. Africa, the breadbasket of the world, has been colonized, subordinated, devastated. But to see the commonalities between the fate of African Americans, the fate of Native Americans, and the fate of Africans in Africa is something that the colonizer cannot afford and doesn't want. And the colonizer cannot afford to have Muslims see themselves as one people. and to see the fate of Mecca and Medina as a personal issue, and the fate of Al-Aqsa as a personal, unmitigated issue for all Muslims. And so the construction of false consciousness. A Palestinian Israeli citizen gets killed for something that a Hollywood movie could have made a great story out of. He tried to save a poor woman being assaulted by soldiers and got 10 bullets for his trouble. The Aqsa Mosque regularly desecrated. Have we forgot Ad-Durra, the child who was killed by Israeli soldiers as a claim to his father? Rabin's government and the breaking of bones, the spraying of sewage water all over Al-Aqsa. Muslim consciousness have become segmented and compartmentalized, breaking down to the most myopic minutia, which cannot see big pictures, cannot see obvious links, cannot make clear connections. In other words, that's the art of subordination, my friends. When you subordinate, you break the subordinated psychology so that they can no longer see for themselves or understand for themselves or think for themselves or analyze for themselves. And as a result, the subordinated busies himself or herself with the minutia of life. I can't control my fate, so let me control maybe what happens in the next minute, what happens in the next meal, what happens with the next joke. Little bits of pieces. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم وأسأل الله يستجيب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. C.G. Whirlman, a man who has done more to serve Islamic causes than the vast majority of Muslims. C.G. Whirlman, because he does not labor under the mentality of a subordinated and colonized human being, can see obvious links and make the obvious connections. He came out with a very important video recently in his regular show titled The Saudi-UAE War on Islamic Charities. In it, Whirlman, as an investigative journalist, does an amazing job unpacking and documenting how the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, while uncolonized, unsubordinated people understand the critical importance of charities in an ummah's life. And so, as the report that I talked about the RSS, documents how Hindu nationalists have created a network of charities all around the world that they nurture, that they protect, that they fight for, and how these charities raise millions upon millions of dollars from Canadian Hindus and American Hindus who are in all types of professions. How a Hindu executive working for Twitter donated millions of dollars, and a Hindu executive in IBM donated millions of dollars, and a Hindu doctor in New York donated millions of dollars. In the world of Islam, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia have persistently and consistently maligned, slandered, and hurt all the main Islamic charities in the world. These charities perform a critical role. Why do they perform a critical role? Because in our modern world, the biggest block of refugees on the face of this earth are Muslims. And the biggest block of orphaned children are Muslims. 50 million orphaned Muslim children. The result of colonial wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, in Pakistan, in Yemen, in Sudan. The result are 50 million Muslim orphans, children. What happens to children who are orphaned, who are displaced? They get trafficked. They get abducted. They get sexually exploited. Nothing good happens. And if they manage to make it and to succeed in life, they grow up often mad and bitter against the very culture that didn't nurture them and didn't take care of them. They often become native informants, maligning and attacking the Islam that they grew up in. Because colonialism, again, convinces them not to notice the American warplane that orphaned them in the first place, but to put all the blame on Islam. Now, Muslim charities play a critical role in providing basic foods and basic shelter and basic medicine to these refugees. Despite this, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have made it a mission to label all types of Muslim charities as terroristic organizations, as terrorist supporters, as linked to terrorism, and Muslim charities have been forced in country after country to spend hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars hiring lawyers to defend themselves and to clear their names. You have to watch this episode. Instead of being all googly-eyed about a moron like, what's his name? The guy that had a discussion with Hamza Yusuf. Blanking out his name. I wonder how many Muslims are googly-eyed about C.G. Wellman. Well, Wellman tells it as it is. And you pause and you think, why? Why does the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia want to do everything possible to undermine Muslim charities? Although they have no intention of feeding the refugees, of taking care of the orphans, although both the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia have in every possible way failed to support Muslim refugees all over the globe. But why would they want to undermine these organizations that perform such a fundamental and necessary humanitarian function? Think about it. What is the greatest danger for the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia? In new Muslim consciousness, a new Muslim consciousness that says Islam is not an Arab religion. You don't get to do with Islam as you wish. You don't get to do with Mecca and Medina as you wish. You don't get to betray and abandon Al-Quds like you've done in the past century. Islam is ours, all of us. And you, people of the Arabian Peninsula, you are but a minority. You are as relevant to Islam as the story of origin in Christianity. To what extent does it matter that Jesus was a Palestinian Jew, a Middle Eastern, an Arab, and a Jew? To what extent does it matter to the full scale of Christian history? Well, they realize that Islamic relief organizations, with their ihsan focus, with their concern about an ummah, with their mentality that wherever Muslims suffer, this is our cause, is a consciousness that the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia do not want. They want Muslims fragmented, myopic, pedantic, irrelevant, marginal, inconsequential, so that they can continue wasting billions of dollars on their toys of promiscuity and corruption. And Muslims continue to look the other way and admire the people that these guys fund and support. The Islam that is ready and apt and appropriate for domination and subordination and for settler colonialism. Allahumma afu anna, Allahumma aghfir lana, Allahumma arhamna, Allahumma tub alayna ya Rahman ya Rahim, Allahumma ahdina li aqraba min hadha rashada, Ya Allah, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Allah forgive our sins. Allah grant us insight, depth and understanding and iman and taqwa and your light, Ya Allah, Ya Ali, Ya Azim. Allah, help us to be real Muslims, true Muslims, Muslims worthy of your cause, Ya Rabbal Alameen. وصلي وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وأقم الصلاة.